Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Ruth Smallshaw Rea, 1924 to 2014. This was originally published as Smallshaw Family Memories Collection, number 12, published on September 9th, 1993. And the title was Ruth Smallshaw Rea Recalls the Past on May 26, 1992 in Rocky River, Ohio. So this was an interview that I did with my dear mother, Ruth Smallshaw Rea. Today is May 26, 1992. We are in Rocky River, Ohio, and with us today is Ruth Smallshaw Rea. Good evening, Mother.
Good evening, Peter. Florence Ruth Smallshaw Rea.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for agreeing to this interview. I hope it goes well. So why don't we start off when you were very, very young? What's your earliest childhood memory?
Well, I believe that my memory goes back to when I was about 3. Whether these are things that my parents have told me or whether I really remember them, I'm not sure. But some of the first memories that I have was when we lived in Yellowgrass, Saskatchewan. My father had the newspaper there. He owned it and was editor of the Yellowgrass Herald. He would teach me nursery rhymes. But then he would say them backwards or end with the wrong ending, and it was very frustrating for me because I would try to correct him. After he had taught me the right way, then he would say, the moon jumped over the cow. Things like that, and it was very, very frustrating. I also remember him saying to Mother, let us go to the SHOW. And I knew that was to go to the movies or the show. I wanted to go too. Another early memory was in church with my mother. Maybe I was a little restless, but a man gave me a penny which I put in my sweater pocket, a copper penny. Later on that night I was in bed with the same sweater on, and I must have been eating a cookie or a piece of cake or something. And I also put in the penny, so I swallowed the copper. That was one of my memories, and of course my mother had to look for it for days. Ha! I said, oh, I swallowed the copper.
You must not have been chewing your food.
Huh, I was probably half asleep. I have a lot of childhood memories. When my brother was born, my little brother, I was so proud of him. My bubber, my bubby. We used to call him brother, then we called him Bubby. First thing, people were calling him Bubbles, and so it finally got to be Bud. Mother thought brother was a little Pentecostal and Bubbles was a little feminine, so we finally got to Bud. We were great friends, but he also teased me a lot as we went along. One of the frustrating things I remember was one time my mother put me in a room and it was full of toys, and she said, now Ruth, straighten out your toys. And I remember playing with one toy after another. I couldn't remember where all the toys had come from, and at the end of a couple hours she said, oh, you should be outside playing. It's nice out. And I never did straighten those toys out, and it's sort of been the story of my life. Huh.
So you enjoyed school, right?
I enjoyed school, and I thought I was pretty smart. I had a low self-esteem as far as how I looked. I was a red-haired, freckled-faced kid, I thought, but I was smart in school, and I enjoyed school.
And you did well in school.
Mm-hmm. It came very natural to me.
And you worked hard in school.
Well, that's what my brother says, but I don't remember working particularly hard. When I was in 3rd grade,
an interruption. So where were we? We were talking about school.
Yes, I never could understand children who couldn't learn how to read because I could remember, even before I went to school. I would see signs that would say something and I would learn them, and learning to read came very easily to me. When I was in the 3rd grade, we shared the 3rd and 4th grades, and I would always watch what the 4th graders would learn on the board, long division and some of the things they had. I would finish my work and watch what the 4th graders were doing. So when I got to 4th grade, I figured I knew all that they knew. My mother always tells the story that when I was through 1st grade, I figured I could teach 1st grade because I knew all the things that the teacher knew. She always tells that story. They suggested that I skip a grade. However, I was sick a lot as a child. I had my first mastoid operation on my ear when I was about 7, and I only weighed about 49 pounds. I was so thin. Then I had several other mastoid operations on my ear, after ear infections, so I was in bed a lot at home, and they would send my schoolwork home, and I would do it. I read a lot. When I took many books out of the library and returned them, they asked if I had really read them all. I had. I felt that I missed a lot of school activities because although I was very good in spelling and other things, I was not very athletically inclined. I always thought of myself as being very, very thin. The best thing that ever happened to me was when I was in about the 7th or 8th grade. I had a friend, Peggy Wood, who said in gym I had such lovely, long, white limbs, and that made a whole new image for myself instead of being a skinny white kid. Huh! So you were somewhat of a sickly child growing up. Oh, yes. I was out of school 1 year in 8th grade from Christmas until Easter or something like that. Did that make you more studious, your poor health? Possibly. Yes, I guess that's true. I enjoyed the academics more than anything else. What activities were you involved in outside of school in high school? Well, I was president of the science club, although I think I resigned. I had a few other activities. I liked to bicycle. I played some tennis, not very well. I never thought I would live. They always thought I would die, and they gave me communion when I was in the hospital. So I never thought I would live. When I was very young, I believed in reincarnation, because I had a vision when I was very young of being in a walled place, a lot of bright light, and I thought I was a nun or a sister. I always carried that with me, that I'd had another life, and I did not think that I would live very long. When I turned 16 years old, it was like a miracle. I thought, my goodness, I made it. I didn't believe I'd get that far. The same thing when I turned 21. So after that, life was a gift, and from then I really enjoyed life. I thought it was just wonderful. I had a great time from then on. You've been very close to your mother from the time you were a baby. Yes, and I almost felt like I was the mother, because my mother was very lenient with me, and she's very good to me, really sort of spoiled me. But she thought she hadn't been well. She thought that she might not live, so I was always sort of a bossy kid, and I sort of thought I was the mother. I was more authoritarian than my mother was. How would you describe your relationship with Bud over the years? I enjoyed Bud. We used to scrap a lot, fight a lot, but I thought he was great. He always had lots of friends, and he was more outgoing than I was. He just seemed to have a good time. How about as an adult? Well, of course, we've been so far away from each other. He's been in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, and I left home when I was 17, so it's a very long time ago. He was Pamela's godfather. Her birthday was June 19th, and his was June 11th, so he used to make a trip down to Cleveland to see Pamela around their birthdays. Bud and I would stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning talking about everything. We seemed to have quite a good relationship. Of course, it was far off, and I always thought he was very good and very close to my mother all these years, and he still is. How do you describe your mother's personality? I think she's very effervescent. I always thought of her as being a very sunshiny person, even though she's had a lot of difficulty. I was in a Bible study, and they asked us to describe our home life. I always thought of Mother as being very warm. We had a little stove in our kitchen, and we would gather around that stove. We would play games. She always played games with us. She was always very dedicated to her church. We went to Sunday school, and then I taught Sunday school. I always thought Mother was a very fine person. I was very impressed by my mother. On a visit to Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, we were touring the lovely Capitol buildings. As we entered the elevator, several distinguished-looking gentlemen greeted Mother very profusely, and she introduced me. One invited us to visit him in his office on Monday. He was the mayor of Regina. Monday morning, Mother began to get dressed, and I asked where we were going. To the mayor's office. We were warmly greeted and had a long, pleasant visit with him, and he presented me with a gold wheat sheaf pin, symbol of Saskatchewan. He had also lost a child. On the way home, I asked her why we were so honored. Mother said, "Oh, I got him elected." Mother had been very active in politics. She said, "He phoned me and asked me to get out the senior citizen vote." Since Mother had a lot of friends, she said, I asked him in return to promise to get us senior citizens a free bus pass. He was elected, and he did. How would you describe your father's personality? Well, my father had a terrific temper as far as I was concerned. My father and I were like oil and water. I would always argue with him, and he would always argue with me. We just had a very tempestuous relationship. What did you argue about? Anything and everything. If he said black was white, I'd say white was black. We would have arguments about anything. One good thing my father did for me was he told me that every day you should learn a new word and you should write it down. I had a little red book and I would write down the new words. I never forgot my first new word was peregrinations, wanderings or travelings. I would have new words. He, of course, being a newspaper man, he was always collecting Rudyard Kipling poems. He was always very erudite. He was a very clever person. Our personalities would clash. I would always stand up to him, whereas my brother was always much more congenial. My brother would never argue with him like I did. He had a temper, and I matched it, I guess. When you look over your life in a general way, how do you see it from the perspective of now going back? Oh, I think I've been a very, very fortunate person. Actually, I really feel that the disagreements I had with my father I do not regret. I feel that it made me a stronger person because when I was 7 years old, I decided that I was going to leave home as soon as I was old enough. I didn't like the climate in Saskatchewan. It was very cold. It was very harsh for me, and so I just made up my mind I was going to go far away sometime, and I did when I was 21. I could have left earlier. I was offered jobs when I was 20. No, I feel very, very fortunate. I've had a wonderful, wonderful life. The hard times that I had when I was younger, I think, made me a stronger person. How do you describe your own personality? I think that's for someone else to describe. I'm probably a little quacky. I have some impulsive ideas. I used to think it was nice to be creative. Now I wish I were a little more organized. I'm not a very diplomatic person. I very often rub people the wrong way. It would be nicer if I were nicer. I pray for myself every day that I get better. How do you describe your husband John's personality? He is wonderful. I think John is just wonderful. I did not want to get married. I didn't think marriage was for me. I think that he is wonderful. He is kind, very bright, and just a wonderful person. I think that almost any other person could get along with John. I was very fortunate that he's the one person that I probably could get along with. He's made a wonderful life for me. It's just amazing, and still is. We've been married almost 42 years, and it's gone by very quickly, and I'd love to have 42 more. Have you learned any guidelines for a successful married life? Probably not. John has probably been too lenient with me. He's been very good to me. Probably should have been a little stricter to me in some ways. I don't know that I have any guidelines for married life. My goodness. I think faithfulness is very, very important. I think truthfulness, too. In our marriage, we seem to have enjoyed the same kinds of things. That has helped. We both like to travel. We've loved our family. I think John has been a wonderful family man, but he's also been very, very good in his profession. As far as rules for getting along, I do think that love of God and the Christian ethic is very, very important. How do you describe your son Mark's personality? Oh, Mark's wonderful. From the moment Mark was born, I looked into his eyes and I felt like I'd known him before. He had a very, very quiet manner. He was 8 pounds, 12 ounces at birth and looked like he was about 3 months old. He had a very, very calming manner, and I've always appreciated Mark. When he walked in the other day, I still felt this very calming feeling about Mark. There were a few years when we did not have that feeling, but generally that's the way I felt about Mark. After an interruption. I believe we were talking about Mark and how he was so calm. What else can you say about Mark in describing him as a son, about his personality, and so forth? Mark was always very bright. He was very easy to raise as a child. He was a good student. I really enjoyed him. Okay, how about Pamela? Well, Pamela and we were often in conflict. Pamela had a mind of her own. Before she was even born, she seemed like she was ready to go. After she was born, she just seemed to have a mind of her own. She just seemed to want to keep going. When she was about 14 months old, she grabbed the spoon out of my hand to feed herself, even though she couldn't feed herself. She was probably younger than that. Maybe she was older than that. She always knew what she wanted to wear to school, and I always had different ideas. It seemed to be that way most of her life. She was very determined. Anything else you want to say about her? She was a joyful little girl. She had a lot of spirit. When I had Pamela, Mark became very independent. We had a book from Grandma Rea on birds, and Mark could recognize and name a couple hundred birds when he was 2 years old from the pictures. When I was nursing Pamela, he would just go off and play with his friends. They played a lot together, Mark and Pam. However, he was always more in competition with her. As they grew older, it seemed to be more so. They seemed to be rather competitive. What can you say about Patricia? Well, Patricia was a very quiet child, very reserved, very shy. I remember one time I went out leaving a babysitter and came back a couple hours later, and she was still standing in the same spot. She was very shy, but also very bright. She entertained herself very well. I would put her down for a nap and come back hours later, and she'd be awake and playing with different things. All of the children, their first sentence was, "Where did it go?" I had some curtains, and when they woke up in their crib, they'd pull it down, and the little tack that would hold it up would be on the floor. I'd walk in and say, "Where did it go?" So all the kids thought that was a word. I'd walk in, and they'd say, "Where'd it go?" First thing. Patricia always played very quietly with all her little things. She was always good on detail because she had these really tiny things. She kept herself amused. What can you say about Peter? Well, by the time we had Peter, of course, it was an exciting thing. I've always said that it was the happiest moment of my life when I brought Peter home from the hospital because the other 3 children were there. Mrs. Vogler was there. When we came home from the hospital with Peter, Patricia and the others came out to greet us. And I had this new baby boy. And it seemed like our family was complete, and it was a very, very happy occasion. Of course, when I was in the hospital having Peter, I phoned the children to tell them that they had a little brother. Mark said, "Well, it's about time, Mother. You took long enough." Pamela said, "Are you sure it's a boy, Mother?" I assured her, and she said, "Have you checked? You can't tell by the hair, you know." When Peter, of course, was born, the doctor said, "Oh, we have a nice little girl." With that, we turned him over, and he urinated on me, and we said, "Oh, Peter." We were going to call him Penelope, and we said, "Oh, Penny." Then we turned him over and said, "Oh, Peter." What's your favorite color? Well, right now it's peach. But for years it was a salmon color. For years it was yellow or gold. Who's your favorite actor? Oh, I don't know if I have a favorite actor. Or who are some of your favorite actors? I don't know that I want to get into all this. I like Gregory Peck. I don't know. This is not a subject I wish to pursue particularly. Do you have favorite authors? Oh, I suppose John Steinbeck. I don't know. Let's go back to the family. Okay, what would you like to say about our family? I enjoyed having you kids, and I thought it was a great time. We used to go for picnics and go to the swimming pool and, of course, our Bahamas adventures. I thought that was fun. Going back to my own life, my career as a teacher of the deaf and art teacher, I taught for 3 years in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, at the School for the Deaf, a couple of years in St. Augustine, Florida, at the School for the Deaf there. I was the beginning teacher and art teacher at both places. Then I came to the Hearing and Speech Center here in Cleveland, Ohio, and then at Alexander Graham Bell. I thought I was very fortunate to have a career I enjoyed so much. I worked my way through college, eventually getting a degree, Bachelor of Science in Education, at Western Reserve University. What can you say about the Zook family reunions? Well, at first I was sort of overwhelmed by the number of relatives. For many years I felt sort of in the minority. I thought it was an awful lot of work because the women in the family just used to cook and work so hard, and it was always so hot over there at Lakeside, Ohio. We were always squished into bedrooms, but eventually I came to enjoy them because my own children were growing up. I saw how they enjoyed it, and my husband enjoyed it so much, but I also felt that I was more isolated from my own family. Of course, we eventually organized it so it wasn't so much work. And then, of course, we started staying longer. What can you say about Grandpa Zook? Grandpa Zook, I thought this was an SFMC. This is going to be a joint issue. Oh, really? Both my grandfather Smallshaw and Grandpa Zook were fine Christian gentlemen. They both were handsome with great twinkle in their eyes. When I was very young, I looked into my Grandpa Smallshaw's eyes, and I thought it was like looking into a mirror. Okay, so what would you like to talk about now? Well, I guess a big focus of our family has been our trips to the Bahamas. I remember how distinctly the whole thing started. We had our 4 wonderful children, and we had a very busy life. One day I was sitting around the swimming pool in Rocky River, and all the children were swimming. I remember thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful to get away from all this, go someplace where nobody else is, just our family? I didn't realize at the time that there are very few places you can go where you don't find anybody else. I went to the library and I got out about 12 books. I thought it would be nice to go to some faraway island. I started writing to different places. John and I had already been to New Zealand and Australia and Fiji, and those places were pretty far away. I finally narrowed it down to the Caribbean. So I wrote to a number of islands, and fortunately I even had some replies. A lawyer from Nassau, Bahamas, wrote to us, and he was building a house on one of the Bahama Islands. Sight unseen, we put a deposit on the house to rent it for a month in the spring around Easter. One night we were over at our friends, the Gregorys, watching their pictures of their latest trip to the Bahamas, and I remarked to my husband on the way home that it looked remarkably like the island we were going to. I told Nan this, and she said, "You know, we've sailed around that island where you say you are renting a house and there's no beach." We realized there was no beach on this particular part of the island, and with 4 young children, it would not be a good place to go. Coral cliffs. However, we rented another house on the island on Elbow Key in Hopetown in the Bahamas, and we went down and enjoyed it very much. We went about 3 years. All our friends, the Gregorys, the Schreiers, the Collarts, and the Barths, were all down with their children. Everybody had 3 or 4 children. We took turns having dinner parties. We had a wonderful time. Suddenly I realized this is not what I had in mind originally. So we were out with the Garretts one night, and they told us about their friends, the Rummages, who had a place on another island in the Bahamas. Again, we rented their house and went down and really fell in love with the island, Cistern Key, in the Exumas. Before we went, I was in church praying and wondered what I could do for Marilyn Garrett, our friend who had multiple sclerosis at the time and was in a wheelchair. I decided to invite their 4-year-old boy David to come down with us. John was his godfather. David went with us for a month. The rest of the Garrett family joined us for the last week. It was quite an experience. We liked the island so much, and we liked the next beach so much. Will C. Grant, who owned the whole island, was interested in selling part of the island to us. And finally we came to an agreement and bought 10 acres, 600 feet of beautiful white sand beach. Cistern Key has been a source of great pleasure and great pain. We've enjoyed it so much for over 25 years. However, that's also where we lost Pamela, where she died in 1971. So it's the height of our joy and the depth of our sorrow. Of course, losing Pam is a whole other story. When I came home and went over to Beechcliff Boulevard and I walked past the old house, 20689, I look at the house and think hard. Maybe what you can do is talk about things that happened while we were living at that house during the 1960s, because I think that's something that I'd like to have recorded. Well, when we were expecting Peter, our 4th child, we realized that our house in Bay Village was very small. It just had 2 bedrooms downstairs, and then the second floor was a dormitory kind of place. So before Peter was born, we started looking for a larger home. We drove around, and one night we saw the house at 20689 Beechcliff and decided to buy it. There was a for sale sign, and we looked at the house and we bought it. When I thought I was expecting Peter, I had labor pains, and we drove in and parked in the backyard and decided that we were having Peter. We went to the Cleveland Clinic. I had taken natural childbirth classes, and John was with me during labor for the first two. He watched for Mark and Pamela, and then at the Cleveland Clinic he was able to be right in the delivery room and watched Patricia and Peter born. I also had a mirror to watch them being born if I so desired to watch. So when we brought Peter home from the hospital, which was such a joyous occasion, we came home a few weeks into May, and then we moved July 4th to Beechcliff. John would take me over there, and Pamela would help me with the baby and Patricia. John sold the house while we were over there waiting to be moved in. After we moved in, it suddenly seemed like an awfully big house to me, although it isn't that big now. I had 4 little children to look after, and Harold, John's cousin, had invited us to visit in Maine, and John had planned to take the 3 children, and I'd stay home with the baby at the end. But at the end, I decided I wanted to go too. So we bought a station wagon and drove off to Maine to see Harold and Marge Freilich. We didn't know much about packing a station wagon. We thought you just put things on top of the car and away we went. Of course, we lost the butterfly net on the first turn and some of the luggage on the highway before we realized you had to strap the luggage down. You didn't strap the luggage on the top of the car? No, We had a luggage rack and we thought you just put the luggage on, We had a lovely time in Maine. When Peter was several months old and Mark and Pam went to school and Patricia went to nursery school, I became depressed. I was nursing my 4th child, and I guess I was getting tired, and I'll never forget when we went to a swimming party over at Aquamarine, and I swam, and suddenly my depression seemed to lift. It seemed to be a lot better, but for a few months there it seemed like I was very depressed. But we had some great times on Beechcliff Boulevard. The children played in the Rocky River Park across the street, and we'd go there for picnics. In the wintertime, they'd have snowball fights and toboggan and skate over at the Rocky River Park. And then, of course, we had our Bahamas trips, which we always seemed to enjoy. The children seemed to have lots of friends. We seemed to have a very, very busy life. We had a picnic table out back, and in the summertime, we always ate outdoors. In the wintertime, we always ate around the dining room table. We had a nice fire in the fireplace. The children always had Halloween pumpkins, and at Christmas, John's parents, Gertrude and Doran, would come over, and Grandpa was always Santa Claus, and he'd rap on the window all dressed up. He would come in with all his gifts. Dick and Joan would bring Mike and Tracy over. The room would be filled with lots of gifts. The year that Peter was suspecting that Santa Claus wasn't real, we were trying to keep him thinking Santa Claus was real, and I went to the door and said, "Well, hello, Grandpa. Of all the things I should not have said, let the cat out of the bag." Yes. One year our neighbor, Mr. Diamond, our next-door neighbor, whose wife was dying of cancer, was our Santa Claus. They were very fond of Peter. He reminded them of their son who had been killed in the Second World War. He was quite concerned. He phoned me up and asked what he should say. I said, "When in doubt, say ho, ho, ho." When he came, you never heard so many ho, ho, ho's in your life. So if I say to you, all of us watching Bewitched on TV in your bedroom, what does that evoke? I don't remember that at all. But I do remember I had the ironing board set up in our bedroom, and we did watch television up there, and I think I remember that was when President John F. Kennedy was shot that we were up in the bedroom. I think I was ironing and you were a few years old. I used to always drive over to the school if it was raining very hard for you children. I think we had to go and pick the children up at school. How about the Huff riots in Cleveland? What did you think about that? I don't have a very clear picture of that, Peter. You never felt threatened by that? I don't believe we did. I'm sure at the time we must have felt very saddened by them. We did attend visits, interracial visits, and had interracial visitors in our home sponsored by our church. We also had peace meetings in our home. John was president of the United World Federalists, World Peace through World Law, and to support the United Nations. We had meetings in our home to support this cause. Do you remember all of us sitting on the porch watching the first landing on the moon in the summer of 1969? No, I don't particularly remember that. Well, you certainly remember Father making pancakes Saturday nights. Yes, I used to go shopping. Saturday was my day to go shopping, and it seemed to me I had to hit every department in every store, trying to keep the family in clothing and everything else. Our friend, Bob Nelson, John went over there one day, and he was making pancakes for his 4 or 5 children. So we thought that was a great idea. So John would always make pancakes, and then, of course, we discovered McDonald's. Do you think that was too bad that we converted to McDonald's? No, I just wished that we had bought stock. When John's investment club had dinner with the wives, I suggested they buy McDonald's stock. I told them several times, and they completely ignored me. It would have been a very good idea. The story of her life. That stock is worth an awful lot if we had bought it. So when Dad was making pancakes, you were out shopping. Correct. Usually I'd go Saturday afternoons, and I used to go downtown. I was one of the very few people that would go right downtown. I drove downtown and shopped. One day a panhandler asked me for a dime for a cup of coffee. I took him into a White Castle restaurant and I ordered him a hamburger. He put up his hand and said, "Make that a cheeseburger." "Ah, well, that's a good story." And at Christmas, we always had great times. We would always take you down to Halley's and Sterling Lindner's to see the great big tree, great big Christmas tree. And we'd take you to the different toy departments to see their Santa Claus land, and we'd always have dinner downtown. That was always high adventure when we go downtown for Christmas some night. And then in the summer, I would take Pamela and Patricia downtown to Higbee's, and we'd go to the Silver Grill, and they'd have their little lunch, and I'd always have Welsh rarebit with almonds on. Later on, when Peter worked at Higbee's, he would bring me a few almonds. So that was Higbee's downtown? Correct. You'd have Welsh rarebit with Pamela and Patricia? Correct. Did they also have Welsh rarebit? They'd have little houses or whatever the special was. One time, Grandma Zook came up from Marion, Ohio. I forget who she was with, Aunt Mary or Grandma Ray. We dressed up Pam and Patty in their little pink dresses and little white gloves and their little hats, and they went downtown with Great-Grandma Zook. Do you remember Rocky River Day? Oh, yes. Rocky River Day was a high point. We worked for a long time on our different floats. We'd always have a different float, and several years you kids won prizes. One year you had a dinosaur, and one year Mark and the Gregorys had a pirate ship and won first prize. One year you made a fire engine and we used up all our red paint. It wasn't too successful. The first Rocky River Day we took Peter to as a baby, I was concerned because of the loud explosions from the fireworks. I was afraid it would hurt his ears because he was just a baby. How about Kensington Carnival? Oh yes, that was another big thing in our lives. Of course, I eventually became co-chairman for the carnival. I also eventually became PTA president, and those were very, very busy years. We always had a great time planning and having Kensington Carnival. Well, you went to many concerts up at the high school for orchestra. Yes, Mark played violin, Pamela played cello, Patricia played viola, and you played trombone. And then all of you took piano lessons. I don't know, Peter, if you did. Patricia played piano more than anybody. She's kept her piano going and her viola and now plays in the Longwood Orchestra at the New England Conservatory in Boston. Yes, we had our string trio there for a while. You saw Mark acting at the high school. I did. Well, I remember him giving his speech at the Rotary Club after Pamela died. I thought it was just wonderful. And then he gave the same talk, Is the Cost of War Too Expensive, at the graduation. Were you ever worried about Mark being drafted for the Vietnam War? Well, I think Mark was going to be a conscientious objector. I don't think he believed in the war. Actually, I was never too worried because his eyes were not very good and he wore glasses, and I did not think that he would be drafted. So you liked that little neighborhood over there on Beechcliff? Yes, it was a very nice neighborhood, and of course I enjoyed all the activities. When we lived in Bay Village, your father had raised the money for the new building for the Nature and Science Center and was the first president in the new building. Later, I became president of the Women's Board. Of course, John had been president of the Junior Chamber of Commerce. That's the group that sent us to New Zealand and Australia. So eventually I became president of the women's group of that, and then eventually president of the PTA. Actually, it wasn't really my bent. Your father had been president of all these things, president of the Nature Center, president of the Cleveland Junior Chamber of Commerce, United World Federalists, etc. He was named Cleveland Young Man of the Year in 1960, won the Distinguished Service Award, and it seemed to follow that I would be president of the women's groups. I handled things all right, but it was not exactly what you were cut out for. Correct. I enjoyed much more when I turned to my painting later on, and I've enjoyed that much more, but I didn't do that really until after Pam died. Why don't we talk about that? That's a very important part of your life, your art. What can you say about that? Well, I've always drawn and painted. My earliest recollections is when I was about 3 years old. I used to draw the 3 bowls of soup for the father bear, mother bear, and baby bear. Put pepper in father's bear's soup or whatever. And I remember my mother was always painting, making screens, painting china and things, and of course she was a great influence on me. I remember I was always considered artistic, so it was just a natural thing for me. It seemed like I was always drawing or painting. So when I was teaching at the School for the Deaf in Saskatoon when I was just 18, they asked me to be the art teacher. I took some art classes at the University of Saskatchewan. So I was the art teacher at the school then and then again in Florida. I had 19-year-old pupils when I was 18. At the Hearing and Speech Center, I illustrated a little book on teaching the deaf. I always did posters and different things for different groups. Later on, after we lost Pamela and I had really considered going back to teaching, I started doing some of my painting and enjoyed that very, very much. It seemed to be more of my thing. I've done Christmas cards for the Society for the Blind for 6 years and a couple for Far West Mental Health Center, one for Trinity Cathedral. I've had art shows in Nassau, Bahamas, and of course at the Barton Center. I have 10 cards in all. Sharma Quilkin is the director there, and she's had me have about 10 shows at the Barton Center. And then I've had a number of art shows at St. Peter's where I'm in charge of the art shows. I enjoy arranging for some other artists too. I've really enjoyed that. After our trip to Africa, I had an African show. I met a girl who was making jewelry and invited her to sell her jewelry at the show. So it's really been a lot of fun. So you have an artistic bent. Yeah, I'm not as good as I'd like to be. I'm not as good as a lot of my friends. Do you think you get good feedback on your artwork from your family? My family's been very encouraging. John particularly. He's always been very congenial about going to my different art projects. Can he give you good feedback on the work you do besides, "Oh, that's really good"? Ha, 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 ha. I don't know my family are that. Patricia has my paintings on her walls and says she likes them. Let's see, so nowadays you enjoy your painting and working out in the yard and you have bridge groups you're involved in. Yes, John and I enjoy playing bridge. We're not that good either, but we enjoy it. Are you still in some Bible studies? Not now. After Pam died, I was in 4 different Bible study groups, probably all at the same time. I needed all the help I could get. I was very, very involved in Bible study, and eventually I think it was because of that we got involved in the women priest case your dad was so good in taking on. During our married life, it seems that I get the ideas, and then poor John has to carry them out. It was very, very good for me to have done as much as I did. You're not in a Bible study now? No, not right at the moment, although I still have my daily word and meditation that I do. I've tried to do some meditating, not as deeply as Peter and Mark, but I meditate every day. Does your mother still receive daily word? I believe she does. Patricia sent me this last one. I've sent it to so many of our friends. Do you still listen to Leo Biscaglia on the radio? Oh, I love Leo. I just saw him on television the other day. I was just inadvertently watching him. There were mothers and daughters who were disagreeing. He came along and said, "Oh, it's so important to love each other and not look at the small things." Oh, I think he's just wonderful. He's just full of love. He said he was one of 12 children, I think, and he's right. Love is the important thing. You're a member of St. Peter's Church. Are you involved in any activities there? Well, I do the art shows down there and bridge. You like to get to church on time, get there early. Well, I do like to meditate in church too. I find it a beautiful spot. You find the service very uplifting. Yes. And you like the current minister. Yes. I just thought he gave a tremendous sermon last Sunday. I think he's very spirited. I really appreciate his encouraging me to have the blessing of Peter and Alice's marriage, because last summer, when he was trying to fax the permission that Peter would be married in Manila to the Archbishop, we were having great difficulty in faxing because of the 12 hours difference in time. We were sitting out the back, and Reverend Stuart Pearson said, "Well, when Peter and Alice come back, we can have a blessing and we'll have a big party." It made me feel better just to think that we would do something like that, because I felt that Peter was going to be so far away. And we did. And we did. You were married in Manila, Philippines, and we all went over to Manila, Mark as best man and Patricia as one of the bridesmaids. John and I went over. It was a lovely wedding and a lovely dinner reception at the Westin Philippine Plaza. We enjoyed our time in Manila very much. And then Peter and Alice have come back, and we did have the blessing. And we did have the big party at the yacht club. And I feel very blessed that the good Lord shone on us. The sun shone, and it was a beautiful day, a beautiful weekend. We had a lovely blessing and reception in the garden at St. Peter's, a lovely dinner party. Almost 100 people came to the yacht club. It was a good time, worked out well. Peter and Alice have been here for 2 months. They had 10 days in California with Mark and Alice's relatives, and 5 days in Boston with Patricia, a week up in Saskatchewan with Bud and my mother. She will be 95 this year. They're leaving tomorrow at 6 in the morning, and I feel we've been very blessed. So you really like living in this house, in this location here? Well, yes. Our family life was mainly on Beechcliff Boulevard, but after Pam died, I found it very, very difficult to stay in that house. I would go in her closet and I would cry. The dining room table without Pamela at it was very difficult for me. Some people, when someone dies, they want to stay where that person was, but I found it very, very difficult. A year after Pam died, we were out in California, and we had known about this house on Avalon Drive. John bought it almost sight unseen. We moved here later, and I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed this home on the lake very, very much. We've been here now 20 years. I love it. I love being on Lake Erie. I love the garden. Every room has a lovely view. I love the flowers. I love our magnolia tree, and I enjoy going down to the beach house down below, where Peter lived for a couple years. I meditate down there too. It's a very quiet spot, and I enjoy going down to the Bahamas, where it's nice and peaceful. Are you making any progress on getting rid of your papers? I thought I was, but I'm very slow. Well, about what year are you on reading newspapers now? Oh, ho, 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 ho. I don't have newspapers now. I'm going through old memorabilia. In the meantime, I've also collected an awful lot of art information and notes and so on, reference material, frames. The basement's filled with all sorts of art supplies. Correct. But you didn't play ping pong, and I had the ping pong table cleared off. I didn't know. You've got to go play ping pong now. Did all your bulbs come up this year? The daffodils came up but didn't do too well. The tulips and hyacinths were nice. You don't want to talk about bulbs. Well, I suppose I really should, because after Pam died, that was one of the most inspirational things for me. To think I put these little brown things in the ground, and in the spring they'd be such beautiful flowers. I've probably planted several thousand bulbs, daffodils, and tulips over the years. It's a rejuvenation. It's spring. It's the Easter message. Well, we're about near the end of this tape, I see. Would you like to make a general statement about your philosophy of life? Oh boy. I do believe in a good Lord, a loving God, and I feel so blessed. Every day is an exciting adventure. I felt that when Peter went to Switzerland, the good Lord had his hand on his shoulder. I pray that he has on all our family. Do you have any advice for Alice and I as expectant parents? I think you'll be wonderful parents. I don't particularly have any advice. I do hope all goes well. I'm just sorry we'll be so far away we can't really be active grandparents. Are you getting excited to vote for George Bush, Bill Clinton, or Ross Perot? I just hope I can vote for some judges John will approve of. This is almost my first time voting. I just became a citizen last year. Do you consider yourself an American or a Canadian? Oh, I'm probably dual. Which country do you feel allegiance first towards? Oh, I think I've lived in America long enough that I'm probably an American, but I'm Canadian born, so you can't get away from that. My roots were fairly deep. I guess not deep enough for me to stay. Do you have any feelings? Do you have any of the feelings your mother has for England? Oh, I think I'm very proud of my British heritage. Yes, I'm very proud that my family were all British, all grandparents and parents born in England, the British Empire. Thanks for a swell interview, Mother. Oh, you're quite welcome, Peter. Ruth Smallshaw Rea. Now here's a poem that I wrote to my mother. April 1986. Dear Mother, you were born in the small town of Estevan. For most of the year you had no need of a fan. We both had ear problems while young, although yours much more did stung. Our fathers are very different men. George was a 2, John is a 10. You moved far away to South U.S. I really don't think the house is such a mess. To Cleveland you came to teach the deaf. With kids like Billy Burt it had to be tough. But then came John Stewart and you agreed to wed, although you'd vowed you'd be better off dead. Then came Mark, Pamela, Patricia Ann, and Peter John, and you decided you were done. Life was grand till 1971, when the roof collapsed and there was no sun. Blackness and tears for many years, and many, many, many more fears. We've been through a lot, this family, Ray, but we're survivors. You can ask Gay. You're quite an artist, we all know. It's better therapy than learning to sew. I'm sorry for what I've said and done. It's obvious I've been no nun. Thanks for the blood, sweat, and tears, without which I wouldn't be here. Peter J. Ray. Well, that concludes today's presentation. Thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.